Hi everyone, welcome to Coffee Break with Your Soul. I have been promising quite a few people that I would make this video, and I have been promising it for quite a while, so I apologize if it took longer than you expected. But I'm finally here, and I was asked to talk about astrology. Astrology appears to be a bit of an elephant in the non-duality room. And I'm often asked all sorts of questions, but primarily, how do I reconcile astrology with non-duality? And also, I'm often asked, what do I think about this notion that's apparently shared by some of non-duality teachers that once we awaken, we don't need tools such as astrology, because astrology is a tool for a separate self. It's a tool that reinforces a sense of separate self. So I find those questions really, really fascinating. And while I don't really take part in debates on the subject, and I really don't debate it, I'm more than happy to share some of my thoughts on the subject. And I will also explain as to why I don't really debate it at all. And I find those questions really fascinating, in particular the question about reconciliation, because we could we could actually replace astrology with any other word, with anything. How do I reconcile non-duality with fill the blank? And so this question about reconciliation is really one worth exploring and looking at, because it's going to reveal perhaps some kind of beliefs that we have that may be really, really subtle, that are behind the kinds of questions that we ask, such as this one. And so I'm really familiar with this dilemma around reconciliation of astrology and non-duality, because even though I grappled with it only for a really short while, I do remember seeing it as a dilemma. And of course, I can only speak of it in retrospect and tell you that the reason why I grappled with this, the reason why I saw it as a dilemma in the first place, is because there was still a sense of separate self. It was very subtle, but it was still there. And so with that, certain things also still appeared to be separate. And so the moment that sense of separation dissolved, the moment that sense of self dissolved, that the dilemma dissolved with it. And so if I were to answer the question, how do I reconcile astrology with non-duality? I don't, because I don't see the need to reconcile the two, because reconciliation implies two separate things. And I don't perceive anything as separate anymore. So even though I remember having that dilemma, I can't feel into it anymore. I really genuinely do not remember what it felt like to perceive anything as separate. The other thing that I think is worth sort of being aware of as we talk about these things, and in particular as we use the terminology such as, words such as awakening or astrology or non-duality, is to really remember that while sometimes it may seem that we're talking about the same thing, say awakening or non-duality or astrology, we will be attaching different meanings to these words. These words will mean different things to different people. And so while it seems that we're talking about the same thing, we can very often talk about very different things, even though we're using the same terms. And so I can tell you that, say, even the way I perceive awakening right now is going to be very different to how I perceived it 10 years ago, or to how I even perceived it, a year ago. As far as astrology, many years ago, I was really, really dismissive of it, but I didn't even have any kind of knowledge about it. It was just more of how I was perceiving it, because I was equating astrology with, magazine horoscopes and with some kind of sun signs descriptions and everything. So I just found it really kind of ridiculous. And so I really was very dismissive and even ridiculed it to some extent. but I really was not well informed in order to really have a well informed opinion on the subject. And so whenever I see these exchanges or conversations about non-duality, awakening, astrology, it's so clear that so many people have so many different perceptions of what those words actually mean. And so in both cases, as far as I'm concerned anyway, the way I perceive it, both non-duality and astrology are just constructs. They're just concepts. They're just interpretations of things that the way people perceive things. And so both within astrology and non-duality, there will be different traditions, there will be different schools of thought, there will be different approaches, different teachers, different ways they talk about these things. So we're never really talking about non-duality that means the same thing to all people, just like we cannot squeeze this vast body of knowledge that is astrology and the many traditions that date back to Mesopotamia into this one thing called astrology that means the same thing to all people. And so I really think that if we are to talk about these things, whether it's about reconciling the two or just generally speaking, it's worth bearing that in mind. So when that thisness, this suchness, this mystery of who we truly are, of this reality is directly experienced, one of the most amazing and most liberating sort of byproducts of this is that we realize we really know nothing, and that this cannot be described. It cannot be nailed. It cannot be put into a description, a box, or anything that will nicely fit into it, and we can say, oh, we nailed it, we now get it. No, we can only speak of our perceptions and our interpretations, our opinions, but they are not describing this at all. They're not even estimates. And so what it does is that it frees us from this need to be attached to any opinion, to any perspective, to any one approach. And really that's extremely freeing, which is it's what I mean when I say that I don't debate this is what I mean, that I don't really debate these topics, because I don't debate or participate in sort of conceptual conversations, because I'm just not really attached to any concept, any one approach, any one school of thought, which is why I always am way more fascinated with the sort of direct experience. So when I talk about astrology, I can only speak of the way I see it and how I'm using it, and I'm really not invested in how other people see it, whether they see it in a correct way or whether the way they see it is right or wrong or anything. This is what I mean by having no personal investment in it, even though I'm using it. So as far as this question about the astrology being a tool that reinforces a sense of separate self, and that once we awaken we don't have to use it again, this is the kind of question that again opens up all kinds of avenues we could explore. But I suppose to just keep it short, when that sense of self and sense of the separation dissolve, there's absolutely no need to use astrology anymore. There is no need for anything. In fact, there is no need to use astrology before or after the awakening. It really doesn't matter. But there's also no need to push it away, to resist it, to judge it, to fight against it. Because, if we're talking about the fear of a sense of self being reinforced, then there has to be a sense of self there in the first place. It's a concern that belongs to a separate self. Because when that sense of self dissolves, that concern dissolves because there's nothing there to be reinforced. So do we need astrology? Do we need anything after awakening? No, but the word need is actually not very useful here. We don't need anything. But awakening is not an arrival point. It really is not. And in many ways, it is actually only a beginning of dismantling and dissolving of the beliefs and patterns that are often deeply ingrained and often unconscious, that have been for years creating and upholding this sense of separate self. And while many of these patterns can be seen and dissolve with the awakening, in most cases, I would say it's after the awakening that actually a lot of stuff starts coming up to the surface and wants to be met, wants to come home, wants to be seen. So we're not talking about working on anything. We're really talking about making unconscious things conscious and meeting the beliefs behind certain patterns, you know, sort of face to face. And we explore them with compassion and with curiosity. So to me, this is how I use astrology. And to me, it serves just like any other tool, whether it's inquiry or therapy. And frankly, it's really not about the tool. It is really about the premise from which it is being used and where it is pointing to. So in that sense, any modality, whether it's therapy, whether it is astrology, whether it is even non-duality, certain non-dual teachings, any modality can reinforce or perpetuate this sense of separation, the sense of separate self. So it's not the modality, it's really who's using it, or rather how they're using it, the premise from which that modality is used. Because if the person using it is not seeing beyond the story and identity, then that inquiry, that work with that person will only be able to go to a certain point. And if the modality is used by someone who recognizes their true nature, our true nature, then that work is going to be completely different. Because when we meet everything from that place of unconditional love that we truly are, from that place that is untouched by any story and by anything, when we meet everything from this place that doesn't require any healing, then we can meet all parts, because there's no fear of meeting anything anymore. There's just openness and an unconditional love that invites everything to be seen and to come home. And this is really the basis of my work. And so when I see a birth chart, I see the humanity and divinity coming together, not as separate. I see a constant creative potential in motion. I see nothing fixed there at all. I see the perfection of the design that goes beyond our ideas of right, wrong, good, bad, and so on. So I have been doing birth chart analysis to people who have no interest in awakening whatsoever. I've done birth chart readings for non-duality teachers, for people who had an awakening. And really, I have to say, I see absolutely no fundamental difference whatsoever. Our experiences may be different, but we're all already this, including the people that don't know that, including people who are not interested in awakening, right? And actually for many, doing a birth chart analysis, it's when for the first time they actually are able to see their lives from a sort of detached point of view, from the bird's eye view. And that often is the first time that they have this opening and they're interested in exploring that and seeing that there's more to life than meets the eye. And so in that sense, it doesn't matter where we're at on this journey, where we're all having a human experience. Life brings all kinds of challenges, and it doesn't matter if it's before awakening or after awakening, and even after liberation, that work continues, but it's not felt like work. It's actually more like a devotion to this. Everything wants to be seen. We actually rejoice when patterns and certain things, you know, come to the surface that we have not been aware of before. Any triggers, anything that still feels sticky, you know, anything that comes from some kind of you know, deeply stored perhaps memories or patterns, is just welcome. It's just welcome, and it wants to be seen, it wants to be explored, it wants to be loved. And that's how it dissolves. And that's how one by one all these things that have been upholding the sense of separate self, you know, keep on dissolving. And that's how that true self that we are becomes more embodied and integrated, and it just becomes our day-to-day experience. There's nothing that needs to be reconciled anymore, because there's no separation between the absolute and the relative, between our humanness and our divinity. And to me, astrology is simply yet another tool that allows us to explore it and to see it for ourselves. So I don't know whether that answers your questions, but this is my current perspective. But like every perspective, they are always subject to change. So if something changes as far as this particular topic, then I'm certainly going to update you. But that's all I've got for now. And thank you so much for watching. Bye.